The brakes have been tampered with. Her voice tore through the morning air like a siren. The driveway of the Granger estate froze. Guests in crisp suits and shimmering dresses turned toward the sound. A small girl stood near the gleaming black sports car, her brown hands trembling but steady as she pointed at the wheel. The sun flashed against the metal, bouncing off the sleek curves of the billionaire's newest pride. Ethan Granger blinked. For a second, he thought he had misheard. Reporters lowered their cameras. His fiancée, Isabella, stepped out from the marble steps, her heels clicking sharply on the stone. The wind caught her hair, but her smile stayed fixed. The girl did not move. Her eyes stayed locked on the car, wide, urgent. "Please, sir, do not drive it," she said, breathless. Someone cut the brake line. Gasps spread through the crowd. A mechanic nearby laughed softly, the kind of nervous laugh that fills silence when no one knows what to do. Ethan frowned, straightening his tie. "Who are you?" he asked. "Maya," she whispered. "I live across the street." Her voice was small, but every word struck with the weight of truth. She pointed again. A thin trail of oil glistened on the concrete, crawling slowly toward the sunlight. The smell of burnt rubber hung faintly in the air. For the first time, Ethan noticed the stain near the tire. Isabella's tone was smooth, almost rehearsed. "She must have touched something. Children should not wander near cars. Security, please." Maya stepped back, shaking her head. "No. I saw her last night," she said, pointing at Isabella. "She went to the garage when everyone was asleep." The murmurs rose. Cameras began to flash again. Ethan's chest tightened. His instinct told him to dismiss it, to calm the scene before it became a headline. But then he saw the way Maya's hands shook, not from fear of punishment, but from something deeper, something honest. He crouched down to her level. "You are sure?" he asked quietly. "Yes, sir," she said. "You would have died." The world seemed to narrow around that sentence. The breeze stilled. Even the birds in the garden went silent. Isabella's laughter faltered. The mechanic bent to check under the car. A faint hiss answered him. When he looked up, his face had drained of color. "Sir," the mechanic said slowly, "she is right." Ethan stared at Maya. The girl's eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan reached out a hand, not in fear, but in gratitude that came too late. Behind them, Isabella stepped back toward the door, her heels echoing like gilt on marble. And for the first time in years, Ethan Granger did not care about his car, his reputation, or the waiting cameras. He cared only about the small voice that had saved his life. The driveway stayed quiet long after the sound of the mechanic's voice faded. Cameras had stopped clicking. The smell of oil and polished chrome hung in the air like something sacred and forbidden. Ethan Granger straightened slowly, his pulse thudding in his ears. The little girl had not moved. Her small hands rested against the hem of her worn shirt, and her eyes stayed fixed on the ground as if she feared she had gone too far. The billionaire turned toward the crowd. "Everyone step back," he said. His tone was calm but final, the kind of voice that did not need to be repeated. The security team obeyed, uncertain, forming a loose circle around the car. The morning sun glared against the glass walls of the mansion, throwing reflections across the marble path. Somewhere behind him, Isabella's heels tapped once, then stopped. Ethan looked back at Maya. "You said you saw her in the garage last night." Maya nodded. "Yes, sir. She had a flashlight. I thought maybe she worked for you, but then she told someone to be quiet." I heard a noise, like a snap. The mechanic confirmed. "The line has been cut clean through. It was not wear and tear." The murmurs grew again, but this time they sounded less like gossip and more like disbelief. Ethan exhaled through his nose and rubbed a hand over his face. He had hosted dozens of product launches, business events, charity dinners, and every one of them had been perfectly controlled. Nothing ever slipped past his team. Yet now, a 9-year-old girl from across the street had exposed something that could have ended his life. Isabella stepped forward, the smile on her face trembling but still in place. "Ethan, darling, this is absurd. Why would I ever—" He raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Not now." The silence that followed was sharp. Maya looked from one adult to the other, sensing the storm building but refusing to back away. She whispered softly, "I only said what I saw." Ethan's gaze softened for a moment, and that was enough. He motioned for the mechanic to close the hood and ordered one of the guards to escort Maya to the sitting area near the fountain. "Give her water," he said quietly. "No one bothers her." Then, turning to the rest of the guests, he added, "The demonstration is over. Please leave the property." The crowd dispersed slowly, whispering, their shoes clicking on the stone like fading echoes of curiosity. Isabella watched them go, her arms folded tightly. When Ethan faced her again, she spoke before he could. "You cannot honestly believe that, child," she said. "Children make things up. They seek attention." Ethan's eyes were steady. "Then why is the evidence under the car?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. He turned away, unwilling to argue in front of the staff. Inside the house, the sound of the door closing was almost too loud. The marble foyer, usually filled with soft music, was silent. Ethan walked to the wide windows overlooking the driveway. Outside, Maya sat on the edge of the fountain, holding a paper cup with both hands. The sunlight touched her hair, catching little sparks of gold. She looked far too small against the vast stone courtyard. He remembered her words again. "You would have died." He called his assistant. "Find out everything about that child," he said. "Her name, where she lives, who her parents are." "Yes, sir," the assistant replied. Ethan ended the call but kept looking through the glass. Isabella approached him from behind. "You are letting a stranger manipulate you," she said softly. "Do you not see what this looks like?" "I see exactly what it looks like," he said without turning around. "It looks like truth." For the first time, she had no reply. She turned on her heel and disappeared up the stairs. Outside, Maya set the empty cup down beside her and traced circles on the stone with her fingertip. She did not seem frightened now, only thoughtful. The guard assigned to watch her kept his distance. When Ethan finally stepped outside, she stood up quickly. "I am sorry, sir," she said. "I did not mean to ruin your event." He shook his head. "You did not ruin it. You stopped a disaster." Maya blinked up at him, unsure how to respond. The silence stretched until he asked, "Why were you near the garage last night?" "I saw the lights on," she answered. "My window faces your house. I like to watch the cars. They are beautiful. My mama says beauty can be dangerous if people care more about it than what is inside." Her words landed heavier than she knew. Ethan crouched beside her, feeling the distance between their worlds collapse just a little. "Your mother sounds wise." "She was," Maya said softly. He noticed the past tense but did not press. The sun had shifted higher, making the shadows shorter. Somewhere behind them, the sound of a police siren grew faint, and then closer. "The police will need to talk to you," he said gently. "Do not be afraid. You did the right thing." She nodded, eyes wide but calm. "Will you believe me?" He paused, then answered, "I already do." When the officers arrived, Maya stood beside Ethan as they examined the car and collected evidence. Reporters shouted questions from the gates, but Ethan ignored them. He only looked once more at the small girl whose courage had shattered the illusion of safety around him. In the reflection of the car's black paint, he saw both of their faces, one lined with power, one lit by innocence, and understood that truth sometimes comes from the smallest voice. And for the first time, the great Ethan Granger felt something more powerful than wealth. He felt gratitude. The following morning arrived gray and heavy with mist. The news trucks had already left the end of the driveway, and the last of the police officers had finished their statements before dawn. The estate felt hollow now, stripped of its shine. Ethan Granger stood by the kitchen window with a cup of black coffee that had long gone cold. The silence pressed around him, thicker than the fog outside. In the guest sitting room near the fountain, Maya sat on the edge of a chair much too large for her. Her feet barely touched the rug. She held the same paper cup from yesterday, now filled with warm milk the housekeeper had given her. The little girl's shoulders were drawn inward, but her eyes still carried the steady focus of someone who had learned to watch before speaking. Ethan stepped into the room. His voice was softer than before. "You did not sleep much, did you?" Maya shook her head. "I kept hearing the cars outside. I thought maybe she came back." "She will not," he said quietly. "The police are handling everything." He did not say Isabella's name, but it hung between them like a ghost that refused to leave. The girl looked down at her cup. "Do they believe me now?" "They do," Ethan answered. "And so do I." He sat across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the fountain outside trickled faintly through the open window. Then Maya reached into her small backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I drew this," she said, handing it to him. On the paper was a rough sketch of the garage. It showed the car, the workbench, and a stick figure near the rear wheel holding something small. Ethan looked at it for a long time. "You saw this from your window?" "Yes, sir," she said. "The light came on around midnight. I thought she was cleaning. Then I heard the snap sound. That is when I looked closer." He nodded slowly. The precision of her observation struck him. She had remembered the detail of the noise, the position, even the tool. "You notice things other people miss," he said. "My mama said to look twice before you believe once," Maya replied simply. Ethan smiled faintly. "She must have been a remarkable woman." The girl hesitated before answering. "She fixed cars. People used to bring old ones that nobody wanted. She could make them run again." Something tightened in his chest. "She was a mechanic?" "Yes, sir. At your company a long time ago," she said. "Her name was Lorraine Parker." Ethan's cup paused halfway to his lips. He knew that name. Years ago, during the company's rapid expansion, there had been an accident in one of the workshops, a malfunction, a faulty brake test, a lawsuit that was quietly settled. He had read the file, signed the papers, and moved on. Now, across from him, sat the daughter of the woman whose name had once crossed his desk. He set the cup down carefully. "Your mother worked for me," he said. "I am sorry, Maya. I did not know she had a child." Maya's eyes shimmered, but she kept her voice steady. She said the people at the top never remember the people underneath. Her words were not bitter, only true. Ethan felt them land like small stones in water, rippling through years of silence. "Your mother saved lives through her work," he said quietly. "I wish I had thanked her when I could." The housekeeper knocked lightly and stepped in. "Mr. Granger, the police want you to review the garage footage again. They say there is a missing segment." Ethan rose but turned back to Maya. "Would you come with me?" She blinked, surprised. "Me?" "Yes. You might notice something that we miss." They walked down the corridor together. The garage, usually bright and immaculate, now smelled of fuel and cold metal. Two officers stood near the monitors. Ethan pressed play. The grainy footage showed Isabella entering the garage at 1:16 in the morning. She glanced around, then crouched near the rear wheel. The camera flickered, then skipped 3 seconds. "Wait," Maya said softly. "Go back." Ethan rewound the tape. She pointed at a faint reflection in the car door, a sliver of movement in the corner of the screen. "There," she said. Someone else was with her. The officers leaned closer. The reflection revealed another shadow, taller, wearing a cap. One officer murmured, "That is not her alone." Ethan's voice hardened. "Find out who that is." When the officers left to follow the lead, Ethan turned back to Maya. "You just helped us again." She shrugged lightly. "I just saw what was there." "As T1, you see what people choose to ignore," he said. Maya met his eyes. "Maybe they ignore it because it is easier." The sentence lingered in the air. Ethan looked down at her small backpack on the floor, frayed straps, a missing zipper pull replaced with a paper clip. Something inside him shifted. He had spent his life building things that looked flawless on the outside, but now he saw how much could be broken underneath. He crouched down beside her. "Maya, where do you live?" "Across the street," she said. "The brown building with the broken elevator." "We live on the 3rd floor. Is anyone home with you?" She shook her head. "Just me. Mama, she passed away 2 years ago. The landlord lets me stay because I help clean the hallway." Ethan's throat tightened. He did not know what to say that would not sound hollow. Finally, he managed, "You are very brave." Maya gave a small smile. "I just do what Mama would do." Ode, the wind shifted through the open garage door, carrying the scent of rain. For the first time in years, Ethan Granger felt the weight of responsibility not as burden, but as a calling. He looked at the girl who had saved his life and thought, perhaps she was here to save something else too. The rain began that afternoon, slow at first, then steady, tapping against the wide windows of the Granger estate. The gray light dimmed the marble halls, softening the sharp edges of wealth. Ethan stood near the window of his study, watching water gather on the glass. The events of the past 24 hours, had left his thoughts heavy and restless. Behind him, the fire flickered weakly in the fireplace. On the desk lay the report from the police confirmation that the second shadow caught on camera belonged to a man who had once been on Isabella's payroll. Ethan rubbed his temples, feeling both anger and disbelief. It was no longer a rumor. Someone had truly wanted him dead. He looked again at the reflection in the glass and saw not the confident billionaire that magazines praised, but a man who had almost become a headline. Then he heard a soft knock at the door. "Come in," he said. The housekeeper entered, holding a folded blanket. "Sir, the child is still in the guest room. She has not eaten much. She asked if she could go home before it gets dark." Ethan set down his pen. "I will take her myself," he said after a moment. "She should not walk in this weather." "Odd." The housekeeper hesitated, surprised, then nodded. "Yes, sir." A few minutes later, Ethan found Maya standing in the foyer, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked smaller than ever in the oversized hallway, her shoes damp from where she had stepped too close to the puddles near the door. "You really do not have to drive me," she said. "I can walk. It is not far." "I know," he said, taking an umbrella from the rack. "But I would like to see where you live." Though, her eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she nodded. The drive across the street took only a few minutes, yet the world seemed to shift completely as they crossed from the private road to the narrow city block beyond the gates. The air smelled of wet asphalt and fried food from a nearby diner. Streetlights hummed faintly. Ethan parked near a faded apartment building whose paint had peeled away in long strips. Maya led him up the cracked steps. The hallway light buzzed weakly, casting everything in a yellow tint. A man with a laundry basket nodded at Maya but paused when he recognized Ethan. The billionaire was out of place here, his tailored coat absorbing the smell of damp walls and old dust. "This is where you live?" he asked gently. "Yes, sir," Maya said. "The elevator broke a long time ago. We used the stairs." They climbed to the third floor. The stairwell echoed with the sound of dripping water from a leaky pipe. Maya stopped in front of a door with the number painted crookedly. She unlocked it with a small key attached to a ribbon. The door opened into a single room with a kitchenette, a narrow bed, and a small table by the window. A stack of old car magazines sat on the floor beside a box of tools. Ethan stepped inside carefully, aware that he was intruding on something fragile. The air smelled faintly of engine oil and soap. On the wall above the bed hung a photo, an African-American woman in a blue jumpsuit, smiling proudly beside an unfinished car. "That is your mother," he said quietly. Maya nodded. "She built this engine for a contest, but she never finished it." He approached the picture. The woman's smile was radiant, full of the kind of confidence that only comes from purpose. "She must have been proud of her work," he said. "She was," Maya replied. "She said one day she would teach me how to build cars that do not break people's hearts." Her words struck him harder than any accusation could. He looked around the small space again, the leaky ceiling, the flickering bulb, the blanket folded neatly at the end of the bed. Everything was worn but clean, arranged with care. "You live here alone?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Mrs. Johnson from downstairs checks on me. Sometimes she brings soup. I help her carry groceries." Ethan sat down on the edge of the chair near the window. "You should not have to manage all this by yourself," he said. Maya tilted her head. "I am not alone when I remember her." The rain beat harder on the window, and the room filled with its rhythm. Ethan looked at her small backpack, the torn strap, the paper clip. He had seen luxury in every form, yet this tiny apartment carried more dignity than any mansion he had ever built. He took a slow breath. "Maya, if your mother were here, what would she want for you right now?" The girl thought for a moment. "She would want me to stay kind, even when people are not. And she would tell me to keep learning. She said knowledge is like fixing engines. You take broken things apart so they can work again." Ethan smiled faintly. "That sounds like something worth remembering." She looked up at him. "Why did you want to see my home?" He hesitated before answering. "Because yesterday, you saw what everyone else ignored. I needed to see where that kind of courage comes from." For the first time since he had met her, Maya smiled a real smile that softened the quiet lines of her face. "It comes from her," she said, glancing at the photograph. Ethan nodded. "Then I owe her more than I can ever repay." He stood, adjusting his coat. "Maya, would it be all right if I came back tomorrow? I have some things I would like to bring you." You do not have to, she said quickly. I know, he replied, but I want to. The girl looked uncertain, then whispered, If you come, bring a story about cars. I like those. I can do that, he said. When he stepped back into the rain, the cold air bit at his face, but something inside him felt warm. Behind him, in the small apartment lit by one flickering bulb, Maya sat beside her mother's picture, humming softly, while the city lights shimmered through the curtain. For the first time in years, Ethan Granger left a place poorer in money but richer in understanding. The next morning, sunlight spilled weakly through the blinds of the Granger estate. The rain had stopped during the night, leaving behind a stillness that felt almost fragile. Ethan sat at the long dining table, untouched breakfast cooling on a silver tray in front of him. The newspaper headline on his tablet read, Attempted sabotage at Granger Motors investigation continues. He swiped it away. The story was already beyond his control, but something else kept pulling at his thoughts, the small apartment across the street, the photo on the wall, and the quiet strength of a little girl who had stood against a world that did not listen. He rose and told his driver to prepare the car, but then he stopped. No, he said, I will drive myself. The engine started with a low hum. He glanced once in the rearview mirror and saw his own eyes tired, but clear. The sky was bright now, washed clean after the storm. As he crossed the city street, the world outside the gates of his estate looked different in daylight. Narrow sidewalks, cracked pavement, and small stores opening their doors for the morning rush. When he reached Maya's building, she was already outside, sitting on the steps with her backpack in her lap. She looked up, surprised, when the black sedan stopped. You came back, she said. I said I would, Ethan replied, stepping out of the car. He carried a brown paper bag in one hand. I brought breakfast. Her eyes widened. For me? For both of us, he said, handing her a warm bagel wrapped in paper. And I found something that belonged to your mother. He opened the car door and lifted a small box from the seat. Inside was a worn leather toolkit with the initials LP stamped on the side. Maya gasped softly and touched the faded letters with her fingertips. This was hers, she whispered. They never gave it back. Ethan nodded. It was stored in the company archive. I asked them to find it. Maya smiled through the tears that threatened to spill. Thank you, sir. Ethan, he corrected gently. When we talk outside of work, you can call me Ethan. She hesitated, then said, Thank you, Mr. Ethan. He laughed quietly. That is close enough. They sat together on the steps, eating in silence while the city stirred awake around them. A bus rumbled past, pigeons scattered across the sidewalk, and somewhere, a radio played an old jazz song. For a brief moment, it felt almost normal. When they finished, Ethan said, I have been thinking about something. You should not be living alone. That is not safe. Maya's small shoulders stiffened. I do not want to leave my home. I understand, he said. But maybe you can have another place to stay for a while, just until we figure things out. She looked at him carefully. Where would I go? I have a guest house behind my main home, he said. It is quiet, and you can come and go as you please. You could stay there until the city finds a proper arrangement. You would have your own space. She shook her head. People will say you are only doing it because you feel sorry for me. He looked at her seriously. I am doing it because I owe your mother something. And because you deserve a safe place. The words hung in the air. Finally, Maya nodded slowly. Only for a little while, she said. Only for a little while, he agreed. By afternoon, Ethan had arranged everything. The guest house sat near the edge of the garden, surrounded by tall oaks and ivy-covered walls. Inside were clean sheets, a soft couch, and a small workshop table he had set up with her mother's tools. When Maya stepped inside, her eyes widened. It smells like the garage Mama used to work in, she said, smiling faintly. That is the idea, Ethan replied. She walked around the room, touching the tools, the small lamp, the stack of car magazines. Then she turned back to him. Can I fix things here? Of course, he said. Anything you like. She picked up a wrench and looked at it as though it were a promise. I could fix that bicycle out front, she said. You noticed that? He asked. It has a loose chain, she replied simply. Ethan laughed softly. Then it is yours to fix. Oh, as the day slipped toward evening, the light through the window turned gold. Maya sat on the floor with the bicycle in front of her, humming softly while she worked. Ethan watched from the doorway, feeling something in him ease for the first time in years. The rhythmic sound of the chain turning under her small hands felt like healing. When she finished, she stood and wiped her hands on a cloth. "It is better now," she said. "It looks perfect," he replied. "It is not perfect," she said with a grin, "but it works." He smiled. "That might be enough." Before leaving, he said, "There is a phone on the desk. If you ever need anything, call me directly." "I will," she said. As he walked back to the main house, the garden lights began to glow. Behind him, the soft hum of the repaired bicycle wheels followed the evening breeze. Inside his home, the quiet no longer felt empty. He sat in his study and looked out toward the guest house, where a single light glowed warmly through the trees. It reminded him of something his father once said, that the smallest lights shine brightest after the darkest storms. Ethan realized he had not just given the girl a place to stay. She had given him back something he had lost a long time ago, a reason to care beyond profit, beyond pride, beyond himself. In the silence of the vast house, Ethan Granger whispered softly to no one, "Thank you, Maya." And for the first time in many years, he meant every word. The following morning arrived with a soft orange glow spreading across the horizon. The Granger estate was quiet, except for the gentle rustle of leaves brushing against the windows. In the guest house behind the main mansion, Maya was already awake. She had folded her blanket neatly and placed her mother's tools in a careful line on the small workbench. The air smelled faintly of oil and sunlight. She walked to the window and looked toward the garden. Birds hopped along the edge of the fountain, scattering drops of water like tiny pieces of glass. For the first time in months, she felt safe. Not completely comfortable, but safe. She whispered to the photograph of her mother that she had placed on the table, "I think you would like it here." Across the garden, Ethan was in his office reviewing new security footage. The investigation had revealed more names connected to the sabotage, but that was no longer his primary concern. His focus kept drifting toward the guest house, where the little girl who had saved his life was learning to live among strangers. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His assistant entered, holding a file. "Sir, the press is requesting a statement. They want to know about the child in your care." Ethan frowned. "No statement," he said. "She is not part of the story, but they already have photographs of her from the day of the incident," the assistant replied carefully. Ethan closed the file. "Then make sure they have nothing else. She is a child, not a headline." The assistant nodded and left. Later that morning, Ethan carried a tray of breakfast down the garden path. Maya was outside, sitting on the step, sketching something on a piece of cardboard. Her hair caught the sunlight like fine thread. When she noticed him, she stood quickly. "You did not have to bring that," she said politely. "I wanted to," he replied. "You should eat something before you start fixing things again." She laughed softly. "How did you know I was going to fix something?" He pointed to the sketch in her lap. "That looks like a blueprint." She held it up. "I want to build a small cart with pedals, like the ones kids used to race downhill, but this one would have better brakes." He smiled. Of course it would. They ate breakfast together in the sunlight. Maya asked questions about engines and speed, and Ethan answered as best he could. Each time she spoke, he saw more of her mother in her, the curiosity, the precision, the quiet courage. When they finished, Ethan asked, "Would you like to come with me to the office today? There is a department that designs safety systems for new models. You might enjoy seeing how things are built." Maya's eyes widened. "Can I really go?" "Yes," he said, "but only if you promise to tell me when something looks wrong. You have a good eye for that." She smiled brightly. "I promise." The drive to Granger Motors headquarters was long, winding through the heart of the city. Maya pressed her forehead against the window, watching the tall buildings flash by. "I have never been this far before," she said quietly. "There is a first time for everything," Ethan replied. When they arrived, the guards at the gate greeted him with respectful nods. Maya looked around the vast lobby, her eyes wide at the polished floors and hanging lights. Every sound echoed the footsteps, the distant buzz of conversation, the hum of machines from the research wing. Ethan led her to the design lab. Inside, Engineers bent over models and screens filled with numbers and blueprints. One of them, a kind man named Harris, looked up. "Mr. Granger, I heard about the girl who saved you. Is this her?" Ethan nodded. "This is Maya. She has an interest in mechanics." Harris smiled warmly. "Then she is welcome here anytime." Maya wandered carefully between the work tables, her gaze darting from one piece of machinery to another. She stopped near a large diagram of a brake system. "That one looks like the car from your house," she said softly. Harris blinked. "You know engines, young lady?" "My mama did," she said. "She taught me to listen to how they breathe." The man chuckled. "Engines do breathe, in their own way. You have a good teacher." Ethan watched as Maya pointed at a small valve on the diagram. "That part looks too close to the pipe," she said. "Would it heat up too fast?" The room went silent. Harris leaned closer. "You might be right. We have had issues with that component during testing." Ethan smiled. "Seems we have found our youngest consultant." Maya looked startled. "I was just asking." "Sometimes the right question is the smartest answer," Ethan said. For the next hour, she moved from table to table, asking questions and listening intently. The engineers, charmed by her curiosity, explained their work in simple terms. By the end, she had a small notebook filled with sketches and notes. As they left the building, the afternoon sun reflected off the glass towers. Ethan opened the car door for her. "What did you think?" he asked. "I liked it," she said, climbing in. "It smells like possibility." He laughed softly. "That is a good smell to chase." They drove back in comfortable silence. When they reached the estate, Maya thanked him for the trip. "I will write everything I learned tonight," she said. "That is a good idea," he replied. "And remember, this is your home as long as you need it." She nodded, holding the little notebook to her chest. That evening, long after the sun had gone down, Ethan stood by his office window again. Across the garden, the light in the guest house glowed softly. He could see Maya bent over the desk, drawing by the lamp. For a moment, he thought of her mother, Lorraine Parker, the mechanic who had once worked in silence at the far edge of his factory floor. Now her daughter sat under his roof, carrying the same spark that her mother had once carried into every engine she touched. Ethan whispered to himself, "Maybe this is what second chances look like." And somewhere outside, the sound of Maya's laughter carried faintly through the night, like the hum of a perfectly tuned engine beginning to run. The following day began with the scent of fresh rain on the grass and the faint hum of the city in the distance. The sun broke through scattered clouds, lighting up the garden behind the Granger estate. In the guest house, Maya was already awake. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor with her notebook open, writing down notes from her visit to the design lab. Her handwriting was small but steady. On the desk beside her lay the worn leather toolkit with the initials LP. Each time she looked at it, she felt a quiet strength, as if her mother was still teaching her from somewhere unseen. Across the garden, Ethan stood in his study, speaking on the phone. His tone was firm but calm. "Yes," he said. "I want every security camera reviewed again. The police found that the second person in the footage worked for Isabella, but I want to know who ordered him. Check financial records, contracts, anything unusual." He ended the call and glanced out the window. The guest house door opened, and Maya stepped outside, stretching her arms toward the light. He smiled without meaning to. It had been a long time since he had seen something so simple make the morning feel alive. When he walked across the garden to meet her, she looked up and grinned. "Good morning, Mr. Ethan." "Good morning, Maya," he replied. "You are up early." "I wanted to finish my notes," she said, holding up her notebook proudly. "I think the brakes on the new model should have an extra safety layer, maybe a small lock that catches if the main line breaks." Ethan raised his eyebrows. "That is an impressive idea." She shrugged modestly. "Mama said there is always a way to make things safer. People just stop looking once they think something works." He nodded slowly. "Your mother was right." They walked toward the fountain together. The air smelled of roses and wet stone. For a few minutes, they simply listened to the sound of water and the distant chirping of birds. Then Ethan spoke again. "Maya, the police have been working hard. They caught the man who helped sabotage the car. He admitted that Isabella paid him." Maya's expression grew serious. "Will she go to jail?" "Yes," Ethan said quietly. "The law will handle it now." Maya nodded but said nothing more. After a moment she whispered, "Do people like her ever feel sorry for what they do?" He thought about it. Sometimes they do, but sometimes it takes losing everything to understand what they had. She looked up at him. "Did you ever lose something?" He hesitated, then answered, "Yes, I lost sight of what mattered. I thought success could fix every problem, but now I know that truth fixes more than money ever could." Maya seemed to think about his words. "Mama used to say the same thing." They sat on the low wall near the fountain. The sun was higher now, making the water sparkle like small diamonds. Ethan noticed how naturally she spoke about her mother, no bitterness, only quiet respect. After a moment, he said, "I need your help again today." Maya blinked in surprise. "Mine?" "Yes, there is an old security guard named Thomas who worked at the factory the night your mother's accident happened. He retired years ago, but he might still have records or memories we missed. Would you come with me to talk to him?" She nodded immediately. "If it helps find the truth, yes." They drove together to a quiet part of town, where the buildings grew smaller and the air smelled faintly of salt from the nearby docks. Thomas lived in a modest house with peeling paint, but a well-tended garden of roses. When he opened the door, his lined face broke into a look of surprise. "Mr. Granger," he said. "I never thought I would see you here." Ethan smiled politely. "It has been a long time, Thomas. I came because I believe we missed something important years ago." Thomas nodded slowly and invited them inside. The living room smelled of coffee and old paper. On the walls hung photographs of the factory and its workers. Maya stared at them, recognizing her mother in one of the pictures smiling, holding a wrench, surrounded by other mechanics. "That is her," Maya whispered, pointing. "That is my mama." Thomas followed her gaze and sighed. Lorraine Parker. She was one of the best. Always stayed late, always double-checked every engine. Ethan asked gently, "Thomas, do you remember what happened the night of the accident?" The old man leaned back in his chair. "I do. She was testing a new brake prototype, said it did not feel right. She asked for a halt in production until it was fixed, but the higher-ups wanted to keep the line moving. The next morning, the system failed during testing. The report said mechanical fault, but she had warned them." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I signed that report. I trusted the people under me to tell the truth." Thomas gave him a sad smile. "You cannot change what happened, sir, but you can make sure her work is not forgotten." Maya looked at Ethan, her eyes shining. "She tried to stop it, just like me." Ethan nodded. "Yes, she did." He turned back to Thomas. "Do you still have any of her old designs or notes?" Thomas stood slowly and walked to a drawer near the wall. He returned with a folder thick with papers. "She gave me these to keep safe in case something happened. I never knew who to give them to." Ethan accepted the folder with both hands. "You just did." Back in the car, Maya opened the folder carefully. Inside were sketches, handwritten notes, and safety concepts far ahead of their time. "These could still work," she said softly. "They will," Ethan promised. "We will finish what your mother started." As they drove home, the afternoon light fell across Maya's face, and she smiled faintly. "Then she will not be forgotten." "No," Ethan said. "She will never be forgotten." When they returned to the estate, Maya carried the folder to her desk in the guest house and spread out the papers like a treasure. The lines drawn in her mother's handwriting seemed to glow under the lamplight, and in that moment, both of them knew that the truth they had uncovered was not just about justice, it was about connection, legacy, and the quiet power of being seen. Night fell slowly over the Granger estate, wrapping the garden in shades of silver and blue. The fountain shimmered faintly under the moonlight, and the guest house windows glowed with a soft amber light. Inside, Maya sat at her desk, her head bent over the folder of her mother's drawings. She traced the lines with her finger, whispering the names of each part as if she were calling old memories back to life. On the opposite page, she had started a new sketch of her own, a small car with improved brakes, inspired by her mother's ideas. She smiled to herself, thinking that maybe one day she could build it. Across the garden, in the main house, Ethan worked late in his study. The folder of Lorraine Parker's documents lay open on his desk. The drawings were detailed, brilliant, and years ahead of their time. He wondered how many lives might have been saved if these blueprints had been noticed back then. He leaned back, exhausted but determined. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. The message on the screen was brief. "Do you really think you can erase what happened?" Ethan frowned. There was no name attached, only a blocked number. Another message appeared seconds later. "She knows too much. Keep her quiet, or we will." His hand tightened around the phone. His first thought was Maya. He stood immediately and crossed to the window. The guest house light still glowed. Relief washed through him, but the unease did not fade. Someone was watching them. He called the head of security. "Double patrol the grounds tonight. No one leaves or enters without my permission." "Yes, sir," the guard replied. He stayed by the window for a long time, watching the faint silhouette of the guest house through the trees. Inside that small house, Maya yawned and closed her notebook. She placed her mother's folder carefully under the bed, next to the toolbox. The night air drifted through the half-open window, carrying the scent of jasmine. She turned off the lamp, leaving only the moonlight to soften the shadows. But she did not notice that a figure was moving quietly near the garden fence, a shadow blending into the dark, slipping past the line of hedges. In the main house, Ethan's phone rang again. "Sir," the guard said breathlessly, "the West motion sensor just triggered. We are checking it now." Ethan's pulse quickened. "I am coming down." He grabbed his coat and ran out of the study, crossing the marble hallway toward the garden door. Rain had started again, a light drizzle that whispered against the stone path. The air smelled of wet soil and roses. He reached the garden just as a faint light flickered near the guest house. "Maya," he called. "Stay inside." Inside. Maya heard his voice and ran to the window. She saw the glow of his flashlight cutting through the rain. Confused, she unlocked the door. "Mr. Ethan?" she called out. "Stay back," he shouted. But before he could reach her, a loud crash echoed from behind the guest house. A shadowy figure had kicked open the small storage shed beside it. Maya froze, gripping the edge of the doorway. Her voice trembled but stayed clear. "Who is there?" The man did not answer. He moved fast, searching the shed, then turned toward her. His face was covered by a cap and a wet scarf. In his hand, a small crowbar gleamed under the lightning flash. Ethan ran forward, shouting for the guards. "Stop! Security!" The intruder dropped something from his hand and sprinted toward the fence. Guards rushed in from both sides, flashlights sweeping across the rain. Within seconds, the man was gone, disappearing into the darkness beyond the property. Ethan reached Maya, his coat soaked. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her voice quivered. He tried to open the shed. He was looking for something. Ethan stepped inside the shed. The door hung crookedly on its hinges, the shelves inside overturned. On the floor lay a broken padlock and a single sheet of paper, a page from her mother's folder. The intruder had tried to steal it. He turned to Maya. "Someone wants your mother's work. That is why they sent those messages." "Ugh," Maya swallowed hard. "Why? It is just drawings." "It is more than that," Ethan said quietly. "Your mother discovered a flaw in one of the brake systems that our company sold years ago. Fixing it would have cost millions, so they buried it. Whoever tried to silence her does not want the truth to come out now." Maya's small hands clenched at her sides. "So they did it to her because she told the truth." Ethan nodded grimly. "And now they are trying to scare us." She looked up at him, her eyes bright even in the dim light. "Then we cannot be scared." Her voice was steady, stronger than before. Ethan felt something shift in him again, the same feeling he had when she first shouted that warning about the brakes. Courage could live in the smallest person. He called the police, explaining the break-in. Within minutes, the sound of sirens approached from the road. Officers searched the area, collected the paper, and took statements. Maya stayed close to Ethan the whole time, her face calm but pale. When the police left, he turned to her. "You were brave tonight." "I just did what Mama would do," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "She would be proud of you." Maya nodded, then whispered, "They cannot hide the truth forever." Ethan looked at the soaked page in his hand, the ink slightly smudged but still readable. "No," he said, "they cannot." They walked back toward the main house together. The rain had stopped, and the air was cold and clean. The moon broke through the clouds once more, lighting their path. Inside, as he locked the doors and checked the windows, Ethan realized the fear had turned into resolve. The danger was real, but so was the purpose. And in the quiet after the storm, the only sound left was the soft, rhythmic dripping of water from the eaves, a heartbeat of the night reminding them both that truth, once spoken, could never be silenced again. The morning after the break-in rose quiet and pale, as if the night itself was still catching its breath. A layer of fog lingered over the garden, softening the edges of the trees and the fountain. The smell of wet earth drifted through the open windows of the guest house. Inside, Maya sat curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. The police had left hours ago, but sleep had not returned to her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the shadow at the shed door. When Ethan entered, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate, she looked up quickly. "I did not sleep," she admitted. He placed the cups on the table and sat across from her. "Neither did I." For a moment, they listened to the faint chirp of birds outside. Then Ethan said, "The police searched the fence line again at dawn. They found tire tracks leading toward the east road. Whoever it was, he did not act alone." Maya nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "He tried to take Mama's papers." "Yes," Ethan said quietly, "but he failed." She stared down at the table. "He will come back." Ethan leaned forward. "Not if we stay smart. You and I are not alone in this anymore. The detectives are watching the property, and I have added extra security around the house. You are safe here, Maya." Her small hands rested on the mug. "Safe does not feel the same anymore." Ethan sighed, understanding more than he wished to. "No, it does not. But courage is not about feeling safe. It is about choosing what is right even when you are afraid." Maya's eyes lifted slowly. "That is what Mama said too." He smiled faintly. "Then she taught you well." The two sat in silence, drinking slowly as the morning light began to break through the fog. Eventually, Maya set her cup down and said, "What will you do now?" Ethan stood and looked toward the window. "Now, I tell the world what really happened. I kept quiet once. I will not make that mistake again." Her voice was soft but steady. "Then I will help you." Ethan turned back to her. "You already have." Later that morning, the sound of engines filled the estate as several vehicles arrived. Private investigators, engineers from Granger Motors, and a legal advisor joined Ethan in the main study. Maya watched from the doorway, feeling both nervous and proud. Ethan began the meeting with a clear tone. "We are reopening the Parker file," he said. "All of Lorraine Parker's notes and prototypes will be reviewed. Every record from the year of her accident will be re-examined. If anyone had a hand in hiding her discovery, I want their names." The room buzzed with quiet tension. One of the engineers, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, raised his hand. "Sir, that file was closed a decade ago. It could damage the company's reputation if we bring it up again." Ethan looked at him calmly. "The truth will repair more than it breaks." Maya watched the faces around the table shift, some uneasy, some moved by his words. For the first time, she saw what leadership looked like when it was guided by conscience rather than pride. After the meeting, Ethan found her in the hall. "You see," he said, "change starts when someone refuses to stay silent. Your mother did that. Now it is our turn." Maya smiled faintly. Maybe the world is finally listening. That afternoon, while Ethan handled calls, Maya walked through the garden. The air smelled of pine and damp leaves. She stopped near the shed where the intruder had broken in. The new lock glinted in the sunlight. She crouched down and touched the ground, where a small silver coin lay half buried in the mud. She picked it up and wiped it clean. It was engraved with a company logo, not Ethan's, but another automotive brand. Her heartbeat quickened. She slipped the coin into her pocket and ran back to the house. Ethan was in the study, reviewing papers. "Mr. Ethan," she said, breathless, "look what I found." He took the coin from her hand, studying it carefully. "That logo belongs to Vexen Motors," he said slowly. "They are one of our biggest competitors." Maya frowned. "Do you think they sent the man?" "It is possible," Ethan said, his mind already moving through possibilities. "If your mother's designs prove a flaw in their systems, they have a lot to lose." She stood beside him, her small hand resting on the desk. Then they are afraid of the truth. Ethan nodded. Yes, and fear makes people reckless. They spent the rest of the afternoon in his office, sorting through her mother's sketches, matching them to the company's past models. Maya worked quietly but with purpose. Every time she recognized one of her mother's notes, she whispered it aloud, as if bringing her memory into the room. As evening settled, the sky turned deep orange. Ethan leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "You should rest," he said. "I am not tired," she replied. He smiled. "That is what I used to say at your age." She looked at him curiously. "Were you brave when you were a kid?" Ethan laughed softly. "No, I was loud. That is not the same thing." Maya giggled. "I think brave people are quiet, like Mama." He nodded thoughtfully. "And like you." The air between them warmed with shared understanding. The past 24 hours had changed everything. The man who once measured success in profits now measured it in trust. And the girl who had once stood alone now had an ally powerful enough to be heard. As night fell, Ethan escorted Maya back to the guest house. Before she went inside, she turned to him and said, "You said once that courage means doing what is right, even when you are afraid. Promise me you will keep doing that." He looked down at her, the lamplight catching the silver streaks in his hair. "I promise, Maya." "Then we will both be brave," she said, smiling. He nodded. "We already are." When she closed the door behind her, Ethan stood for a long time in the garden, the fog curling around the hedges once more. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine hummed, reminding him that the battle was far from over. But for now, he felt something new, something stronger than fear. He felt alliance. In the small guest house window, Maya's lamp flickered on, glowing like a beacon through the mist. It was the light of truth, burning quietly but refusing to fade. The morning sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Granger estate, warming the wooden floors of the study. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the faint scent of rain that still lingered from the night before. Ethan Granger sat behind his desk, his hands resting on a stack of papers, copies of Lorraine Parker's original designs, and the documents that proved how they had been buried years ago. He had made his decision. The truth would no longer stay hidden. Across the garden, Maya was helping the housekeeper water the flowers near the fountain. She wore a faded blue sweater that once belonged to her mother, sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her hair shimmered under the sunlight, and her laughter, light and clear, reached the open window of Ethan's office. It reminded him of the sound of gears running smoothly after years of rust. He looked down at the documents once more. Some of them contained signatures of high-ranking executives who had since moved on to other companies, one of them now sitting on the board of Vexen Motors. That name echoed in his mind like a warning bell. When Maya came inside, she found him staring at the folder. "Are those Mama's papers again?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Yes, they are going to change everything." She stepped closer to the desk, her hands clasped together. "What will you do with them?" "I will show them to the world," he said. "Your mother's work deserves recognition, and the people who ignored her warnings deserve to answer for it." Maya's eyes flickered between hope and worry. "Will that make them angry?" "Yes," he admitted, "but truth has always made liars angry." For a long moment, she studied his face. Then she said softly, "I think Mama would be proud of you." The words hit something deep within him. He had spent years chasing numbers and applause, but this was the first time someone had told him he was doing something worthy. By mid-morning, his legal advisor and 2 engineers joined him in the conference room. Maya sat quietly at the far end, her notebook in her lap. She listened as Ethan laid out his plan. "We are calling a press conference for tomorrow morning," Ethan said. "I will publicly release Lorraine Parker's research and admit that our company failed to act on her safety discovery years ago. We will reopen every model affected by the defect and offer full compensation to customers." The advisor frowned. "Mr. Granger, this will cost the company millions. Our investors—" Ethan cut him off gently. "Our investors will survive. The people who bought our cars deserve better." The room fell silent. Maya could feel the weight of his words. She saw in him the same quiet strength she remembered from her mother's stories about good men, the kind who fixed things not because it was easy, but because it was right. When the meeting ended, Ethan walked Maya to the garden. The afternoon air was warm and bright. She looked up at him and asked, "Will people believe you?" "They will have to," he said. I will show them proof." Later that evening, the news spread quickly. Granger Motors announced an emergency press conference. Reporters began gathering outside the estate gates. Flashing lights filled the air, reflecting off the metal fences. The world wanted to know why one of the most powerful businessmen in the country was about to make a confession. Inside, Maya watched from the balcony. She could see the camera crews setting up and the journalists pacing with notebooks in hand. Ethan stood in the foyer, wearing a simple gray suit. He was not the same man he had been a week ago. The arrogance was gone, replaced by resolve. He looked up toward the balcony and met her gaze. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. "Are you?" He smiled faintly. "Let us find out." The press conference began as the sun dipped behind the hills. The air buzzed with tension. Cameras flashed like lightning as Ethan stepped to the podium. He took a deep breath, his voice steady when he began. "Good evening. My name is Ethan Granger. For many years, my company has built cars that we believed were safe. But today, I stand here not as a businessman, but as a man who failed to listen. A woman named Lorraine Parker once worked for us. She discovered a flaw that could have saved lives, and we ignored her. She paid for our silence with her life." The crowd murmured. Reporters scribbled furiously. Ethan continued. "Her daughter, Maya, reminded me that truth does not vanish just because people try to hide it. Thanks to her courage, we are reopening the case and revealing every document connected to it. No one will hide behind money or titles again." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the room. "We cannot change the past, but we can face it. And tonight, I intend to make things right." At the back of the room, Maya watched quietly. Her small hands clutched the pendant around her neck, her mother's old keychain. For a moment, she could almost hear her mother's voice saying, "Keep speaking, no matter who tries to silence you." After the speech, reporters surrounded Ethan with questions. Who was responsible for the cover-up? Are you accusing Vexen Motors of involvement? What will happen to your company now? Ethan answered each one calmly. Responsibility begins with me, he said, and the truth will handle the rest. That night, the story aired on every major network. Billionaire admits cover-up, the headlines read. Public reaction was mixed: shock, admiration, disbelief. But one thing was certain: people were talking about Lorraine Parker again. Maya sat in the guest house, watching the news on television. When she saw Ethan's face on the screen, she whispered, "He did it, Mama. He told the truth." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. The lights from the city glowed faintly in the distance, and for the first time in years, justice did not feel like a dream. In the main house, Ethan stood by the window, looking out at the guest house. The small lamp inside flickered like a promise. He knew the fight was not over. There would be backlash, lawsuits, maybe even threats, but he also knew he was no longer alone. Because somewhere across the garden, a little girl had reminded a powerful man that truth was worth protecting, no matter the cost. The next morning dawned with the sound of news helicopters circling above the Granger estate. The sky was pale gold, streaked with thin clouds, and the air buzzed with the hum of voices and camera shutters beyond the iron gates. The world had heard Ethan Granger's confession, and now it wanted to see what honesty looked like when spoken by a man of his stature. Inside the main house, Ethan stood at the window, watching the crowd form beyond the fence. Reporters shouted questions, microphones reaching like spears toward the front gate. Security guards tried to hold them back, but the noise carried easily through the morning air. Maya sat at the dining table with a bowl of oatmeal that had long gone cold. She was not afraid, but she looked uneasy. The world outside was large and loud, and it had suddenly turned its eyes toward her. Ethan turned from the window and gave her a small, reassuring smile. "They will calm down soon," he said. "People always shout when they do not know what to feel." Maya looked up at him. "Are they angry at you?" "Some of them are," he admitted, "but others are proud. The truth divides people before it brings them together." She thought for a moment. "Mama used to say that truth is like fixing an engine. You have to open it and see the broken part before it can run again." And Ethan's smile grew warmer. "Your mother was right." A knock at the door interrupted them. His assistant entered, holding a tablet. "Mr. Granger, the media is covering your speech across every major network. Social media is flooded with your statement." People are calling you the man who listened. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That is better than what they used to call me. The assistant hesitated before adding, but not everyone is happy. Vexen Motors released a statement calling your claims false. They say Lorraine Parker's research was outdated and irrelevant. Maya frowned. That is not true. Ethan's tone was calm but sharp. No, it is not, and we will prove it. He dismissed the assistant and sat opposite Maya. Sometimes, when you tell the truth, those who built their lives on lies will try to destroy it. But remember, the truth does not disappear. It waits. Maya nodded slowly, the words sinking deep. What will you do now? I will show them the evidence, Ethan said. Every drawing, every test result, every page of your mother's work. We will make sure the world sees what she discovered. By afternoon, the atmosphere around the estate shifted. The noise outside had drawn neighbors, onlookers, and even supporters holding signs that read, "Justice for Lorraine Parker" and "Truth over Profit." The crowd was no longer just angry, it was curious, moved, divided between disbelief and hope. Maya watched from the balcony. A young woman in the crowd waved up at her, smiling softly. "You are the brave girl," the woman called. "You saved him." Maya blinked, startled. She had not thought of it that way. She simply spoke because silence had felt wrong. Later that day, Ethan held another meeting in his office. This time, it was not filled with lawyers or engineers but with journalists and advocates. The air was charged with anticipation. He laid out Lorraine's original blueprints and the newer versions his team had tested. Side by side, they showed the truth clearly. Her design had predicted a flaw that could have prevented dozens of accidents. As the journalists took photographs, one of them turned to Maya. "You must be proud of your mother," he said kindly. Maya looked at the papers spread across the table, the lines drawn in her mother's steady hand. "I am proud of her," she said. "And I am proud of him too." She nodded toward Ethan. He listened. The room fell quiet. The cameras clicked softly. It was a moment of stillness that carried more weight than any headline. That evening, television screens across the country showed the image of a small girl standing beside a man who had once been untouchable. The caption read, "The child who spoke truth to power." Ethan saw the broadcast while sitting in his study. Maya was asleep in the guest house, her head resting on her mother's folded sweater. He lowered the volume and leaned back, listening to the quiet hum of the night. For the first time in many years, his name was being spoken not for profit, but for redemption. But with the light came shadow. As the broadcast ended, his phone buzzed again. A new message flashed on the screen. "You will regret exposing us." He stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it without replying. Fear no longer held the same power over him. Instead, he walked outside into the garden. The air was cool, and the smell of wet leaves clung to the ground. The moonlight cast a silver glow across the fountain. Through the window of the guest house, he saw Maya sleeping peacefully, her notebook open beside her. He whispered softly to himself, "They can threaten me all they want, but they cannot touch the truth." In that quiet moment, something changed in him. He realized that redemption was not a single act, it was a series of choices, one after another, to do what was right even when it was hard. The next morning, the world woke to see a new headline. Public supports whistleblower. Vexen Motors faces investigation. Justice, slow but steady, had begun to move, and in a small house behind the mansion, a little girl with steady eyes and her mother's courage stirred in her sleep, unaware that the world outside was finally catching up to the truth she had carried all along. The following morning arrived with a calmness that felt almost unreal after the chaos of the past few days. The crowd outside the Granger estate had thinned, leaving only a few reporters stationed near the gates. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, and the fountain in the garden gurgled softly beneath the rising sunday. Inside the house, Ethan sat at the breakfast table, reading through a stack of letters and emails that had arrived overnight. Most were messages of support thank yous from families who had lost loved ones in car accidents now being re-examined, and from engineers who admired his courage to speak publicly. But among the praise were also messages of anger and accusation. Each one reminded him that telling the truth came with a price. He set the papers down and rubbed his temples. The smell of coffee filled the quiet kitchen, but it did not ease his restlessness. From the garden, he could hear laughter, the light, pure sound of Maya's voice. When he looked out the window, he saw her kneeling beside the flower beds, showing the gardener how to use one of her mother's tools to fix the water hose. The sight made him smile. Even after everything that had happened, she carried herself with the calmness of someone who believed in good things. He walked outside to join her. "You seem to be the expert around here," he said gently. Maya looked up, her eyes bright. "It was leaking," she said. "But it just needed a new seal." He crouched beside her. "You have your mother's gift. You fix things that other people give up on." She tilted her head slightly. "Maybe that is what you are doing too." Her words caught him off guard. He chuckled softly. "Maybe." For a moment, they both watched the stream of water flow freely again, clear and unbroken. Then Ethan said quietly, "Maya, can I ask you something?" She nodded. "When you shouted that warning about the brakes, what made you so sure you should speak up? You could have been wrong. People could have laughed." Maya's gaze drifted to the fountain, where sunlight danced on the water. "Mama told me that silence is heavy," she said. "If you know something that can stop someone from getting hurt, you cannot keep it inside. It grows until it hurts you too." Ethan was silent for a long moment. Her words were simple, but they carried a truth he had ignored for most of his life. He said softly, "Your mother raised a remarkable girl." Maya smiled faintly. "She used to say that the world is full of noise, but the truth speaks in whispers. You just have to be brave enough to hear it." The air between them felt lighter somehow. Ethan looked up at the trees swaying gently in the morning wind and thought of how much one small voice could change the course of a life. Later that afternoon, Ethan invited Maya into his study. On the desk lay a small velvet box and a folder of new documents. She sat across from him, curious. "I wanted to show you something," he said. He opened the folder and slid a certificate toward her. "This makes your mother's design officially recognized by the automotive board. From today, the new brake system will be called the Parker Safety Model." Maya gasped softly, her hand covering her mouth. "You mean, they approved it?" He nodded. "Yes, it will be used in every future vehicle we produce. Your mother's name will be on every single one." Tears welled in her eyes. She would have been so happy. "She will always be remembered," Ethan said. He pushed the velvet box toward her. "And this is for you." Inside the box lay a small golden pendant shaped like a gear wheel, engraved with the initials L.P. Maya traced the letters with trembling fingers. "It is beautiful. It belonged to your mother," Ethan said. "She wore it every day at work. Thomas kept it safe all these years. He wanted you to have it." She held the pendant tightly, as if holding a heartbeat. "Thank you, Mr. Ethan," he smiled gently. "Ethan. Just Ethan." That evening, the two of them stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The sky was painted in shades of orange and rose. Below, reporters were broadcasting the latest headline, "The Parker Safety Model Justice and Innovation." The world was finally saying her mother's name with respect. Maya looked out at the skyline, her pendant glinting in the fading light. "Do you think people can really change?" she asked. Ethan turned toward her. "Yes," he said softly, "but only when they decide to listen." She nodded slowly, understanding what he meant. "You listened," he smiled, "and you taught me how." They stood together as the city lights flickered on, one by one. The noise of cars and people drifted faintly from below, a hum of life continuing. But above it all, there was peace, a quiet moment between a man who had learned humility and a child who had given him back his conscience. Before going inside, Maya looked up at the stars beginning to appear. "Mama used to tell me that when you do something kind, the world remembers, even if people forget." Ethan looked at her, his voice warm. "Then the world will remember Lorraine Parker for a very long time." As they turned to go inside, the soft wind carried the faint sound of the fountain below, steady and unbroken like the flow of truth itself, once freed from silence. And that night, for the first time in years, both Ethan and Maya slept without fear. The weight of hidden lies had lifted, replaced by the quiet, steady rhythm of redemption. The morning light spilled softly through the lace curtains of the guest house. Maya sat at the small wooden table, carefully polishing the golden pendant with a cloth. The initials L.P. caught the sunlight, glowing faintly like a memory made solid. She whispered, "Good morning, Mama," before slipping it over her neck. Outside, the estate was quieter than usual. The reporters had mostly left, and the world seemed to have moved on to the next story. But for Maya and Ethan, life was just beginning to find a new rhythm. Ethan had spent the past week working closely with his engineers to finalize the Parker safety model. The first prototype had already passed inspection, and soon it would go into production. For the first time in years, the company buzzed not with greed or rivalry, but with purpose. When Maya stepped out into the garden, she found Ethan standing by the fountain, holding 2 steaming cups of hot cocoa. The morning air smelled like cut grass and blooming roses. "You are up early again," he said with a smile. "I wanted to see if the birds would come back," she replied, looking at the branches above. "They stopped coming when there were too many people." "They will return," Ethan said. "Everything does when the noise fades." They sat together on the edge of the fountain, the sunlight reflecting off the rippling water. "Ethan," Maya said, her voice soft but certain, "do you think Mama knows what is happening?" He looked at her, seeing the quiet strength in her eyes, the same look her mother had in every photo he had seen. "Yes," he said after a moment. "I think she does, and I think she is proud of both of us." Maya smiled faintly, tracing a finger over the edge of her cup. "I miss her, but it does not hurt as much as it used to. I think that means she is closer now." Ethan nodded slowly. "Sometimes love does not leave. It just changes shape." For a while, they watched the sunlight scatter across the garden. Then Ethan stood and said, "Come with me. There is something I want to show you." He led her through the main house to the garage. Inside, the air smelled faintly of metal and oil, but the space was brighter now. Where the damaged car had once stood, there was now a sleek, silver vehicle covered with a white cloth. Ethan handed her the corner of the fabric. "Would you do the honors?" Maya tugged gently, and the cloth slipped away, revealing the car underneath. The name, the Parker model, was engraved in elegant silver letters across the hood. Her eyes widened. "It is beautiful." "It is your mother's design," Ethan said. "And yours. Every detail follows her notes. Every improvement comes from what you saw that night." Maya stepped closer, running her fingers along the smooth surface. "It feels alive." "She built it with care," Ethan said quietly. "And you helped finish what she started. This car will protect people, Maya. Every time someone drives it, they will be safe because of her." Maya looked up at him, her eyes shining. "Then, she did not just fix engines. She fixed people." Ethan smiled. "Yes, she fixed people like me." They spent the next few hours in the garage, checking the car's controls and admiring the fine details. When Maya pressed the start button, the soft hum of the engine filled the space, smooth and steady. It was a sound that carried both strength and peace. Ethan watched her carefully. "Would you like to learn how to drive someday?" Her face lit up. "Can I?" "Of course," he said. "We will start with something small, maybe a go-kart first." She laughed. "That sounds fun." Later that afternoon, they took a walk through the nearby neighborhood. The city seemed warmer somehow. Strangers smiled and waved at them, recognizing the man who had spoken the truth and the little girl who had been brave enough to start it all. A shop owner stepped out and handed Maya a small bouquet of daisies. "For your mother," the woman said kindly. "She made the world a little safer." Maya thanked her, holding the flowers close. As they continued walking, she noticed something she had never seen before: people fixing small things. A man was repairing the loose board on a bench. A woman was repainting her storefront sign. Even a group of children was collecting litter along the sidewalk. She tugged at Ethan's sleeve. "Look, everybody is fixing things." He followed her gaze and smiled. Maybe the world just needed someone to remind them how. As they returned to the estate, the evening sky began to glow with hues of pink and gold. The air felt lighter, like a burden had been lifted. Maya placed the daisies in a glass of water and set them beside her mother's photograph in the guest house. She stood for a moment, studying the picture, then whispered, "We did it, Mama. Your name is safe now." Ethan knocked gently on the door. "Ready for dinner?" She turned, her smile warm. "Yes, but can we eat outside?" "It feels like a day that should end under the sky." He nodded. "I think that is a perfect idea." They dined at the small table near the fountain, candles flickering between them. The crickets sang softly, and the stars began to bloom across the darkening sky. When they finished, Maya leaned back in her chair and said, "You know what I think, Ethan?" "What is that?" he asked. "I think the world is kind of like an engine," she said. "It breaks sometimes, and people get scared. But if one person decides to fix it, other people start helping too." Ethan smiled, his voice low and full of gratitude. "Then maybe, Maya, you just helped fix the world." The little girl looked up at the stars, her pendant catching the candlelight. "Maybe," she whispered, "but I think Mama started it first." And in that moment, beneath the vast quiet of the night, it felt true. The world had changed, not through power, not through wealth, but through a single act of courage from a child who refused to stay silent, and a man who finally learned how to listen. The following day began with a light breeze moving through the open windows of the Granger estate. The sun shone gently over the gardens, glinting off the polished hood of the new Parker model parked in the driveway. Inside the guest house, Maya woke to the sound of birds singing again, the same birds that had once disappeared when the reporters flooded the grounds. She smiled, knowing the world outside had finally found peace again. She slipped on her shoes and walked to the garden, where Ethan was already standing beside the car. He was dressed casually for once, without the usual sharp suit or tie. He looked younger somehow, lighter, as though he had shed years of guilt in just a few weeks. "Good morning," Maya said softly. He turned, smiling. "Good morning, Maya. Ready to go for a ride?" Her eyes widened. "You mean, in that?" "Yes," he said. "It is time you see how your mother's design truly feels." Maya's excitement sparkled in her eyes. "Can I sit in the front?" Ethan laughed. "Of course. You deserve the front seat." They got into the car, the morning light spilling through the windshield. As Ethan started the engine, it purred quietly, smooth and steady. The air filled with the scent of new leather and faint traces of oil. Maya's hands ran over the dashboard, tracing the small engraved letters, "Parker Safety System, version 1. "It is perfect," she whispered. Ethan smiled, guiding the car down the long driveway. "Your mother's hands built the heart of this. Every piece, every bolt, came from her vision." The road stretched before them, flanked by rows of trees shimmering in the sunlight. Maya rolled down her window and let the wind rush past her face. For the first time, she felt not like a guest or a survivor, but like part of something bigger, part of her mother's legacy. As they drove through town, people waved. Some clapped, recognizing the car from the news. Others simply smiled, unaware of the full story but sensing something good in the sight of a man and a little girl in a shining silver car that carried both redemption and hope. They stopped by a small park on the edge of the city. The playground there had faded paint and old swings that creaked with every gust of wind. Maya stepped out, clutching her pendant, and looked around. "Mama used to bring me here," she said quietly, "before everything changed." Ethan nodded, following her gaze to the swings. "It looks like it could use some fixing," he said gently. She grinned. "Then maybe we should fix it." He chuckled. "I think we can arrange that." They sat on a bench near the edge of the park. Ethan opened a small folder he had brought along. Inside were documents and letters addressed to different organizations, schools, community centers, and engineering programs. "I want to create something in your mother's name," he explained. "A foundation that helps kids who love machines and building things but do not have the chance to learn. We could call it the Parker Project." Maya's eyes widened. "A school?" "Yes," Ethan said. "A place where children can learn about science, design, and courage. A place where voices like yours can be heard." She was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. Then she whispered, "She would have loved that." Ethan smiled, looking at the blue sky stretching endlessly above them. "Then we will make it happen." They spent the rest of the afternoon walking through the park, talking about everything and nothing. Maya told him stories about her mother fixing old cars for neighbors who could not afford repairs. Ethan shared stories about his childhood, how he used to take apart his father's radio just to see how it worked. They laughed together, their bond no longer defined by tragedy but by understanding. As the sun began to lower, casting golden light across the park, Ethan looked at Maya and said, "Do you know what I have learned from you?" She tilted her head. "What?" "That bravery does not always roar," he said. "Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is a little girl whispering the truth even when no one listens." Maya smiled shyly, looking down at her shoes. "Mama used to say the same thing." Ethan nodded. "Then she was right. You are proof of it." When they returned to the estate, the air was cool and full of evening sounds. Crickets whined through the trees, the faint splash of the fountain. Maya climbed out of the car and stood for a moment, looking back at it. "Can we keep driving tomorrow?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "We can drive as far as you want. There is no rush anymore." That night, after dinner, Maya sat by her window, watching the stars. She could see Ethan's silhouette in the distance, standing near the fountain with a phone in his hand, speaking to someone quietly. She could not hear his words, but she knew what he was doing. He was beginning the next chapter, the one that would make sure her mother's name lived on. She looked down at her pendant and whispered, "Mama, the world finally knows. Your work is going to help everyone." In the main house, Ethan ended his call and looked up at the same stars. "We are building it, Lorraine," he murmured. "Your daughter showed me how." The garden lights flickered softly, reflecting off the water. The world outside was still imperfect. There were still companies to answer for their lies, still people who valued profit over lives, but something had shifted. One man's greed had turned into responsibility. One child's courage had become a symbol. As midnight approached, a gentle wind swept through the estate, carrying the scent of jasmine and rain. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the peace he had not known for years. And across the garden, a little girl slept with a pendant against her heart, dreaming not of the past, but of what could come next. The future was no longer something to fear, it was something to build. The next morning, the estate was filled with an unusual kind of energy, one that hummed with purpose rather than pressure. The sunlight filtered through the oak trees, casting moving shadows on the cobblestone path that led to the main house. Birds fluttered in the garden again, and their soft chirping blended with the faint hum of the fountain. In the guest house, Maya stood in front of a small mirror, adjusting the golden pendant that hung around her neck. She had polished it until it gleamed like the morning itself. Today was an important day. She could feel it in the air. Ethan had told her that the first public test drive of the Parker model would take place that afternoon at the city's automotive safety center. The event would not only mark the success of her mother's work but also signal the beginning of the Parker project, the foundation they had spoken about the day before. When Maya stepped outside, she saw Ethan by the car, talking to one of his engineers. His expression was calm, but his hands moved with quiet precision. He was no longer the man who chased wealth. He was now someone rebuilding trust. He turned when he saw her. "Good morning, Maya," he said warmly. "You look ready." She smiled. "I am. Is everything set?" "Yes," he said. "Today is not just about a car. It is about her name and yours, too." She tilted her head. "Mine?" Ethan nodded. "You were the one who saw the truth first. Without you, I would not be standing here." Maya looked down for a moment, then said softly, "Mama would have wanted everyone safe. That is what matters most." The drive to the testing grounds was long, but the atmosphere inside the car was peaceful. The roads were lined with early autumn leaves, swirling gently in the wind. When they arrived, the center was already filled with reporters, engineers, and a few invited families. Large banners read, "The Parker Safety Model Built for the Future." As they stepped out of the car, cameras began to flash. But this time, the attention felt different. It was not invasive or cruel, it was expectant, hopeful. Ethan placed his hand gently on Maya's shoulder, guiding her toward the stage set up beside the track. The head of the safety board greeted them. "Mr. Granger," he said with a respectful nod. "We are honored to see this day finally arrive." "Miss Parker, your mother's design is extraordinary," Maya smiled shyly. She always said good work speaks for itself. When the crowd quieted, Ethan stepped to the microphone. His voice was steady, filled with quiet conviction. "Today, we honor not just a design, but a legacy." Lorraine Parker was a woman who believed that truth, no matter how small, can save lives. Her voice was ignored once. "We are here to make sure it never is again." He turned slightly, gesturing to Maya beside him. And this young lady reminded me of something I had forgotten, that courage is not loud. It is steady, like a heartbeat that refuses to stop even when the world goes silent. The audience applauded. Maya looked up at him, her small hands gripping the edge of the podium. She did not speak, but her eyes said everything. When the applause faded, the engineer rolled the silver Parker model onto the test track. The sunlight glinted off its surface, reflecting the sky above. Ethan nodded to Maya. "Would you like to start it?" Her breath caught. "Me?" "Yes," he said with a smile. "You deserve to be the first." She stepped forward, hands trembling slightly, and pressed the ignition button. The engine purred to life, smooth, quiet, confident. The sound filled the air like a heartbeat reborn. The crowd erupted in applause once more. As the car moved down the track, guided by a professional driver, Ethan and Maya watched in silence. It glided through the course with perfect precision, braking cleanly at every stop. When it came to a halt, the safety team erupted in cheers. One of the engineers approached with tears in his eyes. "It works flawlessly," he said. "She did it. Lorraine Parker really did it." Ethan nodded, his voice low but full of emotion. "She did. And so did her daughter." Reporters surrounded them again, but this time their questions were filled with admiration rather than intrusion. One asked Maya, "How does it feel knowing your mother changed the world?" Maya thought for a moment before answering. "It feels like she was still here, just waiting for someone to listen." Her words were simple, but they struck the crowd with the force of truth. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to thin, Ethan and Maya stood near the car. The sky had turned a warm orange, and the light made the silver body of the Parker model glow like fire. "She would be proud of you," Ethan said quietly. "You carried her courage farther than she ever imagined." Maya touched the pendant at her neck. "We both did." He smiled. "Maybe we both learned something from her." They stood together in silence, watching the sun sink behind the city skyline. The world was far from perfect. There would still be challenges, still be voices of doubt, but in that moment, everything felt right. As they prepared to leave, a soft breeze lifted the fallen leaves, swirling them around their feet. Maya looked up at the fading sky and whispered, "Mama, we finished your journey." Ethan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "And now, Maya, it is time to start yours." The headlights of the Parker model flickered on as dusk settled. The car, gleaming in the last light of day, stood as both an invention and a monument, a symbol of truth, redemption, and a promise kept. And in that quiet evening glow, a man once broken by guilt and a little girl who carried her mother's courage drove home together, not as billionaire and orphan, but as family, two hearts bound by the same whisper that started it all. Be brave. Tell the truth. The next few days passed in a calm that felt both earned and fragile. The success of the Parker model spread across the nation, appearing in newspapers, television broadcasts, and online articles. Headlines called it a triumph of truth, and everywhere people spoke the name Lorraine Parker with newfound respect. The world, for once, was paying attention to the kind of story that was built not on power or profit, but on courage and redemption. At the Granger estate, things began to feel different. The echo of wealth was still there, the marble floors, the tall windows, the quiet hum of the fountain, but the energy had shifted. Where there had once been pride and loneliness, there was now purpose. Maya woke early every morning, helping the gardener plant new flowers along the path leading to the fountain. She chose daisies and lavender, her mother's favorites. The air was cool and carried the scent of wet soil. Each morning she whispered, "This is for you, Mama," as she watered the new blooms. Ethan often watched her from the balcony, a soft smile on his face. He admired how she carried her mother's spirit with such ease, how she spoke kindly to everyone she met, how her small presence had somehow restored light to a house that once felt hollow. One afternoon, he found her sitting by the fountain, reading from a small notebook. "What are you working on?" he asked as he approached. Maya looked up, grinning. "It is a list of names," she said. "Kids who wrote to me." He raised his eyebrows. "They wrote to you?" "Yes," she said proudly. "Some saw the story about Mama. They said they want to be engineers too. One girl said she wants to make airplanes safer. Another boy said he is building a robot with his dad." Ethan sat down beside her. Sounds like the Parker project is already growing faster than we planned. She nodded eagerly. Can we help them, even if they live far away? He thought for a moment. Yes, he said finally. We will start small, but we will help every child who wants to build something that makes the world better. Her smile widened. Then we will fix everything, he chuckled softly. That might take a while, but it is a good start. They spent the rest of the day planning ideas for the Parker project. Maya suggested scholarships, workshops, and community repair days. Ethan wrote everything down, impressed by how naturally she thought about others. It reminded him that the greatest wisdom often came from those who had suffered but still chose kindness. That evening, they had dinner in the garden. The table was set under strings of soft lights that swayed gently in the breeze. The fountain's quiet rhythm filled the spaces between their words. As they ate, Ethan looked around and said, Do you remember the first day you came here? Maya nodded. You were angry then. He laughed quietly. I suppose I was. And you were brave enough to yell at a man you did not even know. She giggled. You looked scary, but your eyes were sad. I knew you would listen if someone said the truth. He looked at her for a long moment. You were right. Silence settled between them, warm and peaceful. Fireflies drifted across the garden, glowing softly like tiny lanterns. The night was calm, almost sacred. After dinner, Maya stood and looked toward the guest house. Ethan, she said softly, can I ask something? Of course. Do you ever think Mama forgave them? The people who ignored her? Ethan paused, choosing his words carefully. I think forgiveness is not about letting them escape what they did. It is about not carrying their mistakes inside you forever. And I believe your mother let go of that long ago. Maya's gaze dropped to the pendant on her chest. Then I think I can too. He reached out and gently squeezed her hand. That is what she would want. The next morning, Ethan received an invitation from the National Science Museum. They wanted to dedicate an exhibit to Lorraine Parker's work complete with her original designs, the story of the Parker model, and a small video presentation featuring Maya. When he told her, her eyes widened in disbelief. They want to show Mama's work in a museum? She asked, her voice trembling with joy. Yes, Ethan said. They want to tell her story so that every visitor will know what honesty can build. Maya's smile was radiant. Then she will live forever there. In the following days, they prepared the exhibit together. Maya selected which of her mother's sketches would be displayed, and Ethan worked with the curators to ensure every detail honored her memory. When the exhibit finally opened, people from all over the country came to see it. At the center stood a glass case holding Lorraine's original toolkit, the same one Ethan had returned to Maya weeks ago. Above it, engraved in gold letters, was a quote from her notebook. Every life is worth the effort to keep it safe. When Maya read it, she whispered, That is her handwriting. Ethan nodded. Yes, it belongs here. As the two of them stood before the display, surrounded by quiet awe, Maya said softly, Do you think people will remember her story? He smiled. They will, and they will remember yours too. That night, back at the estate, the sky was clear and full of stars. Maya sat by the window of the guest house, watching them twinkle like 1,000 small truths shining against the dark. In the distance, Ethan's study light glowed faintly. He was still awake, reviewing letters for the next step of the Parker project. Maya closed her eyes and whispered, Mama, your light is everywhere now. Oh, and as sleep began to take her, the last sound she heard was the soft hum of the fountain outside, steady, calm, eternal, like a promise that the truth, once spoken, never truly fades. The morning light poured through the tall windows of the guest house, spreading across the floor in soft gold. Maya woke slowly, stretching beneath the thin blanket. The birds were already singing, their voices clear and lively. It had been 3 days since the museum had opened the Lorraine Parker exhibit, and the letters kept coming, children, teachers, and even young engineers from around the country writing to say how much the story had changed the way they saw honesty and invention. Maya sat up and looked toward the small desk by the window. A neat pile of envelopes waited for her. Each one had her name written in different handwriting, some with bright markers, others in pencil. She smiled as she reached for the top letter. It was from a girl named Alina, age 9, who wrote, My daddy says cars are made by big companies, but I think they are made by brave people like your mama. When I grow up, I want to be brave too." Maya's eyes softened. She whispered, "You already are, Alina." Across the garden, Ethan was in his study, reviewing plans for the Parker project. The initiative was growing faster than expected. Donations were arriving from universities, charities, and even from ordinary people who had seen the story and wanted to help. He had turned one of the smaller buildings on the estate into a learning workshop, a bright, open space filled with tools, blueprints, and a small group of volunteers who came twice a week to teach basic engineering to local children. Ethan looked up as the sound of laughter drifted in through the open window. It was Maya. She was standing by the fountain, talking to one of the volunteers, a young mechanic who had been fixing the old garden lights. Her voice carried through the air, light and curious, and he could hear her saying, "That wire looks too thin for the current you need." The man laughed. "You are right, Miss Parker. I should have known you would notice." Ethan leaned back in his chair, smiling. She was becoming more like her mother every day, sharp, kind, and completely unafraid to speak her mind. Later that afternoon, Maya came into his office carrying a tray with 2 cups of tea. "You did not eat lunch again," she said, placing the tray on the desk. He looked at her with mock surprise. "Since when did you start keeping track of my meals?" "Since you started forgetting them," she replied, crossing her arms in playful defiance. He laughed, shaking his head. "You sound like someone's mother." She grinned. "Maybe I am just learning from you." They drank their tea in comfortable silence. Then Maya asked, "Ethan, when do we open the new workshop?" "Tomorrow," he said. "The first group of students will arrive in the morning." "Would you like to help me welcome them?" Her face lit up instantly. "Yes. Can I show them the toolkit?" He nodded. "You can show them everything. It belongs to you now." The next morning arrived bright and full of promise. The small workshop was decorated with blue and white banners that read, "The Parker Project Dream, Build, Believe." A row of tables lined the center of the room, each one covered with small engines, tools, and notebooks. The smell of wood polish and new paint filled the air. Children began to arrive, some holding their parents' hands, others wide-eyed and excited. Maya stood at the entrance beside Ethan, greeting them one by one. "Welcome," she said, smiling. "Today you are all inventors." Ethan watched her proudly. When everyone had gathered inside, he stepped forward. "Thank you all for being here," he said. "This place is built in honor of a woman who believed that every idea, no matter how small, can change the world. Lorraine Parker dreamed of making cars safer. Her dream lives on through her daughter, Maya, and through each of you." The children applauded softly. Maya stood tall beside him, her pendant shining in the light. They spent the rest of the morning teaching simple lessons: how to use basic tools, how to draw a design, how to test a small model safely. Maya moved from table to table, helping patiently, laughing with the younger kids when their models wobbled or fell apart. She never corrected anyone harshly. Instead, she said, "Mistakes are proof you are trying." By afternoon, the first workshop was finished. As the families left, several parents came to thank Ethan. One woman said, "You are giving them something. We never had the belief that their hands can build something good." Ethan's voice was warm. "Your children are giving that gift back to all of us." When the last car drove away, he and Maya stayed behind to clean up. The late sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Maya picked up a small gear from one of the tables and turned it in her fingers. "Do you think Mama would like it here?" she asked softly. Ethan looked around the bright room, the laughter still echoing faintly in his memory. "She would love it," he said. "This is what she worked for." Maya nodded, setting the gear down gently. "Then I want to keep it going. Even when I grow up." "You will," Ethan said. "You have already started." Outside, the garden lights flickered on, one after another, glowing softly as the sun sank below the horizon. The estate, once haunted by silence, now pulsed with life and learning. That night, as Maya sat by her window, she saw the workshop glowing in the distance. It looked like a beacon, a light for anyone still afraid to speak up, anyone who had been ignored. She whispered to herself, "Mama, they are learning to listen now." And somewhere deep inside, she felt it, the quiet certainty that truth, once freed, would keep teaching long after their voices faded. The fountain outside continued to murmur in the dark, steady and calm, as if whispering the same words back. Keep going, Maya. Keep building. The sun rose quietly over the Granger estate, brushing the trees in a soft golden hue. Dew clung to the grass, and the morning air smelled of fresh soil and new beginnings. Inside the workshop, tools gleamed under the early light, neatly arranged on the tables after the first successful day of the Parker project. Maya entered barefoot, her hair still slightly messy from sleep. She walked slowly, touching the smooth surfaces of the tables and the cool handles of the wrenches. The place felt alive, even when it was empty. She smiled to herself. This was her favorite time of day, the moment before the noise began, when everything was still and full of possibility. Ethan arrived a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. "You beat me here again," he said, handing one to her. "I could not sleep," Maya replied. "I kept thinking about yesterday. The kids were so happy." He smiled, settling into a chair. "They were. You did something special, Maya. You made them believe in themselves." She looked thoughtful. "Do you think Mama ever felt scared when she started her work?" Ethan paused. "I think everyone feels fear when they do something new. But your mother believed that the fear meant she was doing something worth trying." Maya nodded slowly. "Then I think I understand her now." Outside, the sound of tires on gravel broke the calm. A dark sedan approached the main gate. It stopped near the fountain, and a tall woman stepped out. She wore a dark blue suit and carried a slim folder under her arm. Ethan stood, instantly alert. "That is strange," he murmured. "I was not expecting anyone." The woman approached the workshop with calm confidence. "Mr. Granger," she said, extending her hand. "My name is Amanda Lewis. I represent the National Innovation Board. May I have a word?" Maya stepped closer to Ethan's side, curious but quiet. Amanda smiled kindly. "And this must be Maya Parker. I have heard so much about you." Maya gave a polite nod, clutching her cup of hot chocolate. "Hello?" The woman turned back to Ethan. "Mr. Granger, we have been following the success of the Parker model and the Parker project. The board would like to offer official partnership status. That means national funding, new equipment, and the chance to bring this program to schools across the country." Ethan blinked, momentarily speechless. "You mean you want to expand the Parker project?" Amanda nodded. "Yes, sir. We believe every child deserves the chance to learn from stories like this one. Lorraine Parker's name should not belong to one company, it should belong to the world." Maya's eyes widened. "Mama's name? In schools?" Amanda smiled. "Yes, Maya. Children will learn about her in classrooms, not just museums." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then Ethan exhaled slowly, his voice thick with emotion. That would mean everything to her, and to me. They spent the next hour discussing details: how the project would grow, how instructors would be trained, how the message of integrity and innovation would be carried forward. Maya sat quietly for most of it, listening carefully, her mind full of images, children in classrooms building small models, teachers telling her mother's story, and her mother's name written in bright letters on chalkboards across the country. When the meeting ended, Amanda handed Maya a small silver pin shaped like a gear. "This is for you," she said. "Every big idea starts with a single spark. You were that spark." Maya held it carefully, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." After the car drove away, the two of them stood in the garden, watching the sunlight reflect off the fountain. Ethan broke the silence first. "Do you know what this means, Maya? Your mother's work will live forever. Every school, every child, she will keep teaching them." Maya nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "She will never be forgotten." Ethan smiled gently. "Neither will you." That afternoon, they gathered the children who had joined the first workshop. Ethan told them about the new expansion, and the room erupted in cheers. Maya stood beside the chalkboard, holding up the silver pin. "This means that what we start here will go everywhere," she told them. "So when you build something, do it with kindness, because kindness is the strongest part of any machine." The children nodded, their faces full of awe. When the day ended, Ethan and Maya walked home through the garden. The light had softened, and the air was cool. Do you think Mama can see us? Maya asked quietly. Ethan looked toward the horizon where the first stars were appearing. I think she sees everything, he said. Every laugh, every lesson, every life her work touches. She is still here in you, in this place, in the things we are building. Maya smiled faintly. Then I hope she is proud. She is, Ethan said softly. I promise she is. That night, the estate was quiet except for the steady murmur of the fountain. Ethan worked late, signing new papers and reviewing partnership details. But when he finally looked out the window, he saw Maya standing in the garden, holding the silver pin up toward the moonlight. It shimmered softly, reflecting the stars above. He walked outside, joining her. What are you doing out here? He asked gently. I was just thinking, she said, about how one whisper can turn into something this big. He smiled. And it all began with your voice, Maya. She shook her head. It began with hers. I just finished what she started. Ethan nodded, looking up at the sky beside her. Then maybe both of you finished something the world needed. The wind moved softly through the trees, carrying the faint scent of lavender and metal, a mixture of the earth and invention, of memory and future. And as the stars shimmered above, the little girl and the man stood side by side, bound by the same truth that had changed both their lives. That courage, once spoken, never disappears, it multiplies. The following morning arrived soft and bright, the kind of morning that seemed to carry a promise. The sun painted warm streaks of gold across the estate, and the sound of the fountain blended with the gentle hum of distant voices. Today was the official announcement of the Parker Project's national partnership, and the Granger estate was alive with quiet preparation. Inside the guest house, Maya stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the wrinkles from her dress. It was a simple blue one, chosen because it reminded her of her mother's old work shirt, the one that always smelled faintly of engine oil and lavender. Around her neck hung the golden pendant with the initials LP, and on her collar was the new silver gear pin Amanda Lewis had given her. Together, they gleamed like two parts of the same story. Ethan knocked softly before stepping inside. You look perfect, he said with a warm smile. Ready to meet the world again? Maya nodded, her small hands clasped together. I think so. Do you think Mama would like all this? Ethan's voice softened. She would not just like it, Maya. She would be proud, because this was her dream, people learning, building, and believing. Outside, guests began to arrive. Representatives from schools, engineers, journalists, and children from the first workshop filled the garden. The banners fluttered in the gentle wind, reading, The Parker Project Building Futures Through Truth. When the time came for the announcement, Ethan stood before the crowd. His voice carried calm confidence as he spoke about Lorraine Parker's vision, about the day Maya shouted the truth that saved his life, and about the power of listening when it matters most. He then gestured to Maya. But this project is not just about the past, he said. It is about what comes next. And no one understands that better than the person standing beside me. Maya stepped forward. The microphone felt big in her small hands, but her voice was clear. My mama always said that every problem is just something waiting to be fixed. She said the world can be like a broken machine, but it will start working again if enough people care to repair it. So today, I want everyone to promise to listen when someone speaks the truth, even if it is small, even if it is hard. The audience fell silent, and for a moment, the only sound was the breeze moving through the flowers. Then, as if on cue, applause began, soft at first, then stronger, rolling through the crowd like a wave. Ethan looked down at her, his eyes shining. You did it again, he whispered. She smiled, the sunlight catching the pendant at her neck. We both did. After the speeches, the guests wandered through the garden, admiring the exhibits and models the children had built. Maya watched them quietly, feeling something shift inside her, a calm, peaceful knowing that this was not just her mother's legacy anymore. It was hers too. As the day faded into evening, she sat by the fountain, dipping her fingers into the cool water. Ethan joined her, carrying 2 cups of lemonade. The world heard you again today, he said. She nodded slowly. Maybe they will keep listening now. He looked toward the horizon, where the sun was sinking behind the hills. They will, because you taught them how. And as the last light of day touched the water, Maya whispered, Mama, we did it. The truth is safe now. The evening settled softly over the Granger estate, wrapping the gardens in a golden hush. The crowd had gone, the lights from the event now dimmed, leaving only the quiet rhythm of the fountain and the soft glow of lanterns along the path. Maya sat on the stone edge of the fountain, her shoes off, her bare feet brushing the cool surface of the water. The air smelled faintly of lavender, the same scent her mother used to carry home from the workshop. Ethan joined her, his jacket draped over one arm, his expression calm and full of gratitude. "You know," he said quietly, "this place feels different now. It feels alive again." Maya smiled faintly. Maybe it was always alive. It just needed someone to listen. He nodded, watching the reflection of the stars ripple across the water. "You gave this house its heart back, Maya. You gave me mine too." For a long moment, they sat in silence, listening to the night. Then Maya looked up at him. "What happens next?" Ethan leaned back slightly, looking toward the workshop that still glowed softly in the distance. "We keep building. We teach more kids. We fix more broken things. And maybe, one day, you will lead the Parker Project yourself." She laughed softly, the sound light and bright. "Maybe. But I think Mama would still be the real boss." Ethan smiled. "I think she already is." The wind carried a gentle chill, and the trees rustled like quiet applause. Maya reached for the pendant at her neck and held it close. "Do you think Mama knows we finished her dream?" Ethan looked at her, his eyes warm with certainty. "She knows, Maya. She has known all along." The fountain's water shimmered under the moonlight, and for a brief second, it looked as though two reflections glowed side by side, one of a man who had found redemption, and one of a child who had carried truth without fear. Maya smiled up at the night sky, whispering, "Thank you, Mama." Ethan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Let us go inside," he said. "Tomorrow, we start again." As they walked back toward the glowing workshop, the sound of the fountain faded behind them, steady and eternal, a reminder that truth, once spoken, never disappears. It simply keeps flowing, like water, finding its way into every heart willing to listen.